it's Kona Raven, and I'm back with a second tutorial. In the first tutorial, I made the actual memory folio, and I have drawn in the lines where the actual score marks are. And the reason why knowing where the score marks are important is because anything that you attach to the pages, you want it to be above the score marks. So I'm going to go over the waterfall feature of the memory albums. So there's two types of waterfalls that I use, and I'll go over the easiest one first. So first I need to determine how wide I want my flaps to be. So I know that this page is 8 1/4 by 11 and almost 3/4. So I'm going to cut this down to 11 1/2 just to make it easier to measure. And then what I'm going to do is cut it in half again, but lengthwise now. So this is 8 1/4, so I'm going to go 4 1/16. And now I have a long part here that I'm going to find the middle of it. So it's 11 1/2, so that would be 5 3/4, and I'm going to cut it at 5 3/4. And I'm going to do the same on this one also. 5 3/4. Okay, now I have 4 pieces here that are going to all be part of my waterfall. And now I'm going to score it at 1/2 inch. And this is going to be the part that attaches to the memory folio. So 1/2 inch. And then you want to bend it and then crease it with your bone folder. And this measures 5 1/4 by 4 1/4, which is great for 5 by 3 photos. So I only used one A4 sheet of paper, and I'm going to get 4 flaps for my waterfalls out of it, which is 8 photos, or 4 photos in journaling. But you can obviously make your waterfall, with as many flaps as you want. Just for demonstration's sake, I'm only going to use 1 sheet. So once you have your pieces, what you want to do is you want to line up the creases onto one another. So here's the crease here. I'm lining it up with the other crease from another flap. And once I do that, I'm going to tape it in 2 places, so on either side. That'll keep it stable. And you're only taping it just to make sure that they stay together. And then again, you're going to line it up along the edge and then line the 2 folds together, and then you're going to tape it. Everybody's got a different way to do it. Some people adhere it to a strip of paper, which you can do also. And then, again, lining up one edge plus the creases. And then I'm going to tape it on both sides. Okay, so now I have them all lined up, and even here there's a gap here, so if I wanted to adjust and make sure that they were all straight, I would just trim off just a bit. And now they're all straight and they all line up. Okay, now we're going to adhere the waterfall to the folio. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to tape over those 4 flaps like this. Now I'm going to adhere it to the page. And the end result is this. And I would adhere this part down, or you can cut another sheet to the size of the page of the flap, and then adhere it down so that you'll have an extra photo mat down here. But for now, I would adhere this down, and I would have these 3 flaps here, 1, 2, and 3. And normally I paper the inside so you don't see the seam or the space between each of the pages. Okay, and that is the simple waterfall. So now I'm going to demonstrate how I did the large horizontal waterfall that I have in my Bundle of Joy memory folio. And it has a few more steps than the other one. We want to determine how large our pages should be. So I took a regular A4 cardstock, and I do always trim it down to an even number that's easier for me to, measure. Okay, and then, so I'm going to determine where the middle of my page is. So I'm going to score it at 5 3/4. So now the size of this page is 5 3/4 by 8 1/4. So now you want to determine exactly how large your page is going to be. So this is the way it's going to be flipping. So I'm going to make it 5 1/4 by 6 1/4. And that is actually how I made my first page. So here is, again, an A4 sheet that I cut down to 11 1/2, scored it in the middle at 5 3/4, and then it gave me 5 3/4 width, and then I determined the length at 6 1/4, and I cut it accordingly. So I have all my pages that are going to go onto the binding. Okay, so now let's move on to the binding. So another A4 sheet of paper, and what I'm doing is I'm going to score it at every 1/2 inch. So 1/2 inch, that's 2, that's 3, That's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I've scored it 9 times at 1/2 inch. Now, as you can see, I have drawn in these lines here. Those are my cut lines, and it is every third 1/2 inch. So here's 1, 2, 3, and then I cut there. So I'm cutting, there's 1, and 2, and 3. All right, so now you should have 2 score lines right down the middle of it. And this is going to serve as your binding. I'm just folding them, and then I'll crease them later. Okay, so now we know that our pages, and I guess you could have done this before, but we know that our pages are 6 1/4. So you can either cut these to 6 1/4 or slightly smaller. So I'm going to cut them to exactly 6 1/4. I know we could have done this sooner. We could have just cut it before I cut them into strips. Oh well, 6 1/4, and then again 6 1/4. Okay, so now I have all of these, pieces here, which are going to serve as my binding for my pages. So now the next step, before we get to the binding, is to create a base that these are going to adhere to, because like the other waterfall, I'm not going to adhere these directly onto the memory folio. What I'm actually going to do is create a grid where I will adhere these. So what I'm doing is I'm adhering it every other 1/2 inch. So what I've done is drawn 1/2 inch lines again, just like I did when I creased it. I just drew 1/2 inch lines instead. And again, we know that it's going to be that these are they're 6 1/4. So we're going to cut this sheet down to 6 1/4, and we're going to cut it to here, and then of course here. Okay, and the reason why I've done this again is because now I'm going to adhere these to this sheet of paper here, because this is actually going to make it a lot stronger when I tape it all down. So I'm going to tape the back end of my binding piece. Okay. And then I'm going to line it up with that 1/2 inch that I've drawn in and adhere it down. Now I'm going to skip one and then adhere it to this one. And again, I would prefer to use glue rather than tape, because I know glue is much stronger. I'm just using tape for time's sake. And then we're going to skip another 1/2 inch and adhere it to the last one here. Okay. So now I have all these on here, and these are going to serve as my binding for my pages. Now let's go over how we bind the pages, which actually is pretty simple. So again, I would prefer using glue. I'm using tape just because I know this will take long. So I'm going to be running tape all the way down the long edges and the two short sides. Okay. And then I line up my page. And then I do the same on the other side. Okay, and now that it's adhered, okay, it's created a pocket on top. And now you just pretty much do the same thing all the way through by adhering all your pages to each of these here. Okay, so let's do that again. And adhere it down. You want to make sure that you're not going over, you're not adhering it past your score mark. And then 3 pages. And you'll notice that it sits pretty flat, and it does, and the reason is because this isn't standing up at all. It's not ever going to stand up and have a spine like that, so it has a freedom to lay flat because your spine is actually flat. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but okay. We're going to line it up and adhere it down. Alright, so you get the idea. And then, to adhere it to the page, you would just flip it over. This is the piece of paper that you had, or cardstock that you adhered to your spines, and you would just tape over all of the spine, and then bring it over to your folio and pretty much adhere it wherever you want. You really want to be careful that you don't overlap. You don't make it so long that it, you know, goes over the crease of your folder. So you really have to be careful about how long your pages are, or how many that you have, or before you even build the folio, you should probably figure out how long this is going to be so that you can kind of adjust your folio maybe to it. But this would fit just perfectly in there. And that's how I did my my horizontal waterfall with a pocket. All right. Well, I hope that helped. I felt like this one was a lot harder to do a tutorial on, but if you have any questions, please let me know. Aloha!